So, and then man comes along at the end, and he's in charge of the whole thing. So, you guys that were here, what are your thoughts? Make sense? Doesn't make sense? Did I lose you?
Makes perfect sense.
Huh?
It makes perfect sense.
Okay. Today we're going to look at the scientific view of it. I put that in quotes. What is the scientific method? Somebody tell me how that's been. What's the first step?
Hypothesis.
You form a hypothesis. And I had to do one in biology at IUPUI, and my hypothesis was birds of the night probably have bigger eyes than birds of the day because they need to gather more light than birds of the day do. And so we started measuring, they had all kinds of species in the storeroom. They had owls, they had all kinds of things. So we started measuring and found out my hypothesis was wrong. But the retinas are bigger, not the eyeballs. So we found out what the truth was, but my hypothesis was wrong, and I had to correct it. Right? So after I form a hypothesis, what do I do then?
I don't know. Quick question though. So, I'm sorry it's like a tangent, but why didn't Christianity and science used to work together?
Wait, can't they?
No, didn't they used to though?
Oh.
Didn't they used to go hand in hand?
Yeah.
Why did they stop?
Like I said, when we started this course, we're going to deal with that in the third session.
Okay.
Okay. But yes, they did, and there's an agenda now. Not necessarily in the church or in the schools, but even above that. And it deals with spiritual warfare and all kinds of things going on. So they get a hypothesis. What's step 2?
Test.
You test it. You do your measurements, and they suggest how many times you do it. 3. When I was in school, it was 7. But, okay, whatever but you test it. And you have to get a repetitive answer. You can't get one answer and then the next time get a different answer, the next time get a different answer. Or you have to admit that my hypothesis is wrong and something else is going on here. And do some other research. Okay, after you test it, what's the next step?
Analyze your data.
Hmm?
You analyze your data that you've collected.
How do you do that? That's right. How do you do that? The data has to be analyzed, but by somebody else. You have to release your data to the scientific community after you copyright it or whatever, and you have to let them test it and analyze it and see if you did something wrong and see if you're credible. Okay. And finally, what's the last step?
Conclusion.
Hmm?
Conclusion.
Conclusion. You distribute it to the entire scientific community, and it ends up in textbooks, or it ends up in laboratories. It ends up developing new medicines, vaccines, whatever. Okay, that's a scientific method. Now, question. How did they apply the scientific method to the first thing on the list? 3.6 billion years ago, we had simple cells. How do you come up with that?
Well, imagine you start with what we have now and work your way backwards.
Say what?
Start with what we have now, complex mold-sized cell organisms, and work your way backwards.
Okay. And how do we factually do that?
A lot of big words and white coats. I'm not quite sure.
Say what?
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure either. I don't have an answer.
I think it's good English, I don't know.
It sounds like the hypothesis, but how do you test it? Simple cells don't leave fossils. Only bodies with structure leave fossils. So how do you test that? Now, I asked you like 6 weeks ago to take these home and look at them. On this list, what doesn't make sense?
The whole list. The whole list.
Yeah, pretty much. For it to be true, it probably had to start with simple cells, okay? And so that is a logical guess. Because I can't think of any way on this world, unless you believe in Dr. Who, is that who?
No.
Hmm?
Doctor Who.
Doctor Who? What?
Unless you
Is
believe
that
in
the
Doctor
doctor
Who.
with- that-
Yes,
with
Doctor
the phone
Who,
booth?
with the phone booth, yes, Doctor Who.
Well, now, maybe he can jump in the phone booth and go back 3.6 billion.
He
years.
has.
Take a look. I mean, that
He
might
has,
work.
yes.
And Don would endorse that.
I'll take the trip with him.
Guarantee you, Don would endorse it. See that Dr. Who person. All right. Okay, number 2. Photosynthesis in 3.4 billion years ago. Now, what is necessary for photosynthesis?
Light, sun,
Light and what?
sun, the sun.
Okay, light and sun, and
Plants.
that is the fuel for it, but what is the chemical reaction that creates it? Chlorophyll? Yeah, if that chlorophyll, the sun, and the chlorophyll is in the leaf of the plant, and the sun shines on the leaf, and photosynthesis takes place, and you have that conversion from carbon dioxide to oxygen. The plant keeps the carbon in order to build itself, make the branches and the trunks and the leaves, and it releases the oxygen into the air for us to breathe. Okay? When do plants show up?
Long time later,
475 million years ago?
3 billion years after.
We're short about 3 billion years there. How did photosynthesis occur for 3 billion years without plants? And chlorophyll? And whatever else? Did you guys do the assignment and look at this? And
No.
We weren't here.
right. Well, this whole thing looks like, I got a hypothesis for you this morning. The sun is hotter than it used to be. And I have proof. When I was in my 20s, my head never sunburned. And I never wore a hat. But now, I have to wear a hat because I have to go outside in the sun and my head sunburns. So the sun must be hotter.
I agree, I'm the same way.
And I sort of noticed Jason nodding over there. So, I have proof that the sun is hotter than it was 40 years ago, right? Go ahead and say it.
It's not just that. For further evidence, I sweat way faster than what I do. And a lot more.
We ought to write that down and test it with the sun too.
Well, that would.
So the
that
sun
would-
must be hotter.
But in order to test this,
Oh.
this requires a lot of effort.
Further
I'm
proof.
not for
Yeah,
it.
further proof. Okay, so the sun is hotter, right?
I gotta disagree.
I gotta disagree with you too. But that's kind of what's going on here. They say, well, we can't really go back and test it, we can't look at it. So, this is what makes sense. And you know, with my sunburned scalp thing, it makes sense that the sun would be hotter, right? But I didn't look at all the data. I lost 90% of my hair in those 40 years, and so my head sunburns. Okay, what else we got here? We have Okay, the next one down is a sexually reproduction of eukaryote. Alright, so we go down here to, where is this? 475 million years, we get land plants. Right? And the Lord told them to be fruitful and multiply. But then at 400 million years, 75 million years later, what do we get? Seeds. Did you catch that? 475 million years, we have land plants, but we don't get seeds until 400 million years. So how did the plants reproduce for 75 million years?
It was a slow process.
Say what?
It was a slow process.
Okay. Let's take us a little further. Let's go down to 130 million years. What do you get?
Flowers.
Flowers. Where do seeds come from? What's the process for developing seeds? On your bean plant, where does bean come from that has seeds in it?
The blue,
Come from
the blue,
The flower makes the fruit. The
Flower.
fruit has the seed. The seed falls out.
the flower develops, and there's the pistil and the stamen and the pistil, okay? And they reproduce, like they say up here in sexual reproduction of 1.5 billion years. And then after they reproduce, they create the bean, and the bean has the seed inside of it. The whole thing's backwards, isn't it? I mean, we got the flower after we got the seeds, we got the seeds after we got the plants, and nobody knows where the plant comes from. No explanation for how the plant comes from, except they tell us up at 1.2 billion years, there's sexual reproduction is born. Is this starting to make sense to you? Or are you starting to think, maybe this is not quite what it ought to be? And, to be honest with you, we've swallowed this for almost 100 years now. We sat in a classroom, we let some professor who think he's God tell us what is true. We believe it because he said it, and we don't think about it. Now, this comes from Wikipedia, and if you go down and you look at the sources at the bottom, there are some major contributors, Ivy League schools, who produce this list and this timeline. Yale and MIT and all kinds of schools like that. Big schools signed off on this. This data didn't come from some old man living in a cave. It came from our academic community at a much higher level than some of us have to do. Okay. So, what do you think?
It kind of baffles me that these people that are very I imagine they're highly intelligent. They can believe all this garbage, but they can't believe there's a higher being that created it.
It takes a whole lot more faith for me to believe this than it does to believe in the first chapter of Genesis. At least it makes sense.
Yeah.
At least God followed his own logic when he did it. This is kind of like which came first, the chicken or the egg. And it's been debated over the years for quite a while. But the bottom line is, God made the chicken laid eggs. God made the plants, and plants made eggs.
Or did God make the egg and the egg?
That's what I was
Who sat on it?
A duck.
Eric, are we gonna really do
Just saying.
John, you might have to be the surgeon of ours. Do you see my point? Do you see where I'm coming from? All right. Now, if the plants came first and there was 1.6 billion years between plants and animals, what would happen to the atmosphere?
Way too much carbon dioxide. Or oxygen, sorry. Way too much.
The Earth would become oxygen-rich. What happens if you become oxygen-rich? And this happened about 50 years ago. They found out what happened if you become oxygen-rich. I'll tell you about it in a minute. What happens if you become oxygen? You said something, Kristen.
The plants die?
Right, there can't be life. Life begins to struggle. Right. Now, you think the more oxygen you get, the better things would be, right? Right. Well, back in the 50s, and I know you guys don't even hint of what happened back in the 50s.
1950.
Thank you. Back in the 1950s, the orphanages, the Catholic orphanages, decided that they would help out the nuns who had to take care of the little babies. So they got automatic feeders and whatever. They had the little things that would hold the bottle and keep the bottle warm. And another thing they did was they began to, both in the hospitals and in this orphanage, they began to add oxygen to the incubators for newborn babies that were born early, babies that were born premature. They started putting oxygen in there so that they could breathe easier, and so that their lungs wouldn't have to struggle quite so much and do so much work. They could spend more time developing and less time converting oxygen to whatever the body needed. What was the result? You ever hear about that?
Did they pass away?
Hmm?
Did they die?
The babies started going blind because an oxygen-rich environment began to attack the eyes, and it crystallized the eyes from the baby. And so they had to go back to using the nasal tubes so that the oxygen itself, the environment itself that was touching the eyes and making contact with the eyes wouldn't be oxygen-rich, wouldn't crystallize the eye, and the baby would deform appropriately. But an oxygen-rich environment is actually detrimental. If there's not that delicate balance there, it's detrimental to life on Earth and to that ability of for that life to develop correctly. Right? And several babies went blind before they figured out what the problem was. When they went from the nose tubes to the oxygen that was just injected into the incubator, the baby's eyes couldn't handle it. So God created this delicate balance. So if they're going to tell me that there's a 1.2 billion years between plants and animals, that symbiotic relationship that we share with the environment around us is lost. And so you're going to have an oxygen-rich environment, and there are several cases where we find out that is not good. That causes detrimental problems in development. Okay, why would we have this exaggerated timeline? God says, the Bible says 6 days, this says 4.6 billion years. Why would we stretch it like that?
I don't know why it's stretched out like that. I think the whole, theories of evolution and all that is designed for one purpose, and that's to cause us to lose focus on what's the actual purpose, the actual deal. God created it. It says how he created it very plainly. He spoke it into existence, and it is power beyond our comprehension. He spoke it into existence. He created light. 4 days later, he created the sun.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable. That's, we
Yeah,
can,
how does that work?
yeah, how's that work? You know, so we're losing focus from the argument. We know what we believe. We know what is true. This is to get us off the path because it gets us caught up in our own justification to be right, to argue, to do that. The Great Commission is to go out and witness and bring people to the kingdom. And when we get wrapped up in the distraction of the details of stuff that we can't even comprehend to start with, how in the world are we going to argue that? Why do we argue that?
You're exactly right.
Jason?
The whole issue is a spiritual warfare between Satan and Jesus. And they're trying to claim souls. And so they're trying to discredit God. If I were to tell you there's one verse in the Bible that's not true, but I'm not going to tell you which one it is. Can you believe any verse in the Bible?
No.
No, because you don't know if that's going to be the one. I'm going to tell you, there's one verse in the Bible that's absolutely true. If you go back into the original languages, they really mess that up. They use the wrong word, and it means just the opposite of what that verse says. But I'm not going to tell you which one it is. Can you believe any of them? No. Where would you start if you wanted to weaken a house that had been properly built?
At the beginning, the foundation, the cornerstone, the very.
Beat up the foundation. I was looking at the house in Indianapolis a few weeks ago. Rion's friend, I walked up and all around the concrete blocks that the house is sitting on the corners have cracked and are going like this. Okay. So I said, have your downspouts ever been hooked up to a drainage system? Well, yeah, but it clogged up and we didn't want to replace it, so we just pulled the hoses up. We let the water dump out now at the corners of the houses. I said, well, the water has soaked in underneath your foundation, and the weight of the house now has broken your foundation, and now the foundation is cracked, and the weight of the house is causing it to go like this. Right, John? You ever seen that?
Yes, I have.
How many hundred times?
Not hundreds, but I've seen
It happens a lot. I mean, you know, what they needed to do was tear up the perimeter drains, put down a new perimeter drain it someplace and get the water away from that one. Well, the best place in the world to go to discredit the Bible is Genesis chapter 1. And there's no way in the world it could have possibly been 7 days and 6,000 years, right?
Actually, 6.
Huh?
6.
Six, well, yeah, there's 7 days, but you rest for one. You know, but God created it all in 6, and then he rested. Now they go into it and they say, but that word for day could also be interpreted period, a period of time. Is that true?
Well, God's version of a day might be different than ours. We don't know that.
Okay. Remember when we were reading through it, it said, and morning and day of the first day, and morning and day of the second day, and morning and day of the third day.
But he created the whole universe too, so.
Hmm.
So he created the whole universe too, so, you know.
That's true. And in our comprehension, it's not possible. But, and we're gonna deal with this next week.
Well, it's not like, I mean, in the Bible or anything else, it's not like we've ever seen God do the impossible, so, you know, that's not really.
Okay. Is there any proof that the earth is young?
Yes.
Hmm?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Moon. Moon dust.
The moon. Okay.
It's not. When we landed on the moon, if you look at a lot of the pictures of the moon landing, they had those long legs on it. They were expecting, because they thought the Earth was, millions and billions of years old, they were expecting that much dust on the Earth, on the moon. So when they landed on the moon, they needed those to be sinking into the dirt, or the dust, or else they were going to sink right down in. When they got up there, it was only 6 inches. Is that right? 6 inches. So the dust on the moon collects an inch every 1,000 years, and there was 6 inches. So it made the Earth and the moon 6,000 years old.
That's exactly right. How do we know that there's 1 inch every 1,000 years when we haven't been in space but 50 years,
Satellite.
60?
The satellites.
Satellites. When we first put up the first satellites, they had these photocells on them. And we didn't consider space dust. And so after 5, 6, 7 years, dust started to accumulate on these photocells, and the batteries stopped being charged, and the satellites quit working. And so when we got the space station up there, we started doing some tests, and we found out that there was 1 inch of space dust for every 1,000 years. Now, it hadn't been up for 1,000 years, but they tested how long it took for 1/16 of an inch to form, and then they multiplied it out, and they found out that it's about 1 inch for every 6,000 years. So what Don said is true. We expected there to be thousands and thousands of inches of dust, and so not only were there long legs there, but there's big pads on them so that there would be more resistance to sinking into the dust. Found out there's 6 inches of dust on the moon. Bible says that there was 6,000 years of human history. 2,000 years from Adam to Abraham, 2,000 years from Abraham to Jesus, and 2,000 years from Jesus to Jesus. First coming and second coming. And then there will be a 1,000-year reign, which will make a full 7,000 years. That's what the Bible says. The moon kind of testifies. We know the erosion rates of all minerals. We know how long it takes for granite to erode. We know how long it takes for limestone to erode. We know how long it takes for copper to erode. Okay? If we're talking about 4.6 billion years, and you apply the erosion rate to, let's say, Mount Everest, Mount Everest ought to have went flat about 2 billion years ago. But it didn't. It's still there, and it's still eroding away, and it's eroding away at the proper rate of time. The bottom line is, it's still there. And the erosion rate tends to say that we've been around for about 6,000 years. They had decided to test the whole theory at Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls is, Niagara River is a limestone-based river with water flowing across it, and it erodes every year. On either side of it, there are granite veins holding the limestone base in the center. So they decided, we're going to rush right out there, and we're going to set up some stakes, and we're going to test the rate of erosion, and we're going to prove that the world is millions of years old. So they set up their stakes and they began measuring, and they expected they would get, I forget what the increment was, but it was less than an inch a year of erosion. Turns out Niagara Falls is eroding at the rate of about 8 feet a year, and they calculated it out, and it comes to the point where the earth is about 6,000 years old, or 4,500 years old for Niagara Falls. Why would it be 4,500 and not 6,000? What happened 4,500 years ago?
The flood?
The flood, which set everything in motion. But that test that they took on Niagara Falls, and immediately when they found out that it did not fit with their scenario, they scrapped it. Now, scientific method says what if my hypothesis fails?
Retest?
I share the data so somebody else won't waste time doing the same thing. And maybe if we all work together and we all share data, we can figure out why my hypothesis failed and what the truth is. But in today's age, if the hypothesis fails, we scrap the data because I don't want to be wrong. Part of finding the truth is being wrong occasionally in order to be steered in the right direction. And if I don't want to publish data that I find out is wrong, it's because what? It doesn't fit my scenario? And it goes right back to what Jason says. The scenario is not about scientific fact. The scenario is who's going to be in charge. And a lot of people don't want God to be in charge of their life. They want to be in charge of their life. That's how we got communism, by the way. So, next week we're gonna look at some scenarios like the Ice Age and some of those periods. And we're going to see, we're gonna look at the data that is in the textbook, and then we're going to look at visually what makes sense. And there's some, I was amazed at some of the information that I found. So, we'll look at that next week.